We get feedback as we go around the churches that this next sequence of slides is what turns many people around. This is what turned me around, in fact. I came to the Lord the hard way in my mid-20s. It wasn't for another 12 years that I could accept his word from the very first verse as a straightforward reading. I want to share with you the slide concept that turned me around. Here we've got Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It's very good, just like God said. But if people try to do what I tried to do in my first 12 years as a Christian and accept the millions of years of the fossil record, guess what? Where that puts Eden? On top of a pile of bones representing death, bloodshed, suffering and disease over millions of years. Basically, we put the shedding of blood before Adam's sin. If you put the shedding of blood before Adam's sin, then why did God shed blood because of sin? Why does the shedding of blood have anything to do with sin? I suggest to you that compromising with evolution completely destroys the whole basis for the atonement. I said, how would you have answered if you'd been her father? And this highly qualified theological college graduate said, oh, that's the trouble with young people nowadays, always wanting an answer for things that have no answer. And so I said, look, there's an answer. Hebrews 9:22, for example. Without the shedding of blood, there can be no forgiveness of sins. And his response caught me completely off guard. He said this, with a very knowing look on his face. He said, oh no, if you take that line, it causes enormous difficulties for you back in Genesis. It doesn't, of course. When you look at the world today, you see evidence of a vast, watery catastrophe. Fountains of the great deep breaking open, depositing layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of sediment. And then later on, vast quantities of water flowing off the land, leaving behind canyons. You know, the Colorado River could not possibly have carved those steep-sided parts of the canyon, Colorado River as it is today. They're tens of kilometres apart at the top. Geologists call them underfit rivers. The evidence is staring in their face of a watery catastrophe. When we get local floods today, they leave a big enough mess. Imagine what the global flood did. Fountains of the great deep breaking open. Things being covered over quickly. You'd expect to find their remains. And we do. This fossil fish looks almost good enough to scale and eat. This next one's one of my favourites. Got covered over so quickly, didn't even have a chance to finish swallowing its lunch. So when we look at the order of burial in the fossil record, that's not the order of evolution and extinction over millions of years. It's the order of burial in the global flood and its aftermath. Makes much more sense. When I did first year geology, I was an atheist at the time, and in all innocence, I asked my geology lecturer, why is it that we find rocks folded without cracking? And he said, I don't know either. Maybe over millions of years they sort of become like plastic. Today, though, I've got a very different perspective. I see that these rocks weren't folded after they hardened. They were folded while they were still wet, like clay. And so you see these massive mountain ranges folded with no cracking. Exactly what you'd expect on the basis of the account of history in the Bible. So this is what we see in response to the creation evolution issue. Yeah, you'll get sneering and mocking. You'll get a lot of people coming back for more. Look, I just need a bit more time to think about it. What about be ready to answer their questions? But occasionally you get the gold, where you get people who believe. We've got lots of testimonies. Here's just a couple. A young man wrote to us, he said, firstly, I want to thank you for helping me to prove to my stubborn self there certainly is a God. Your Creation magazine gave me the scientific and spiritual evidence I needed to firmly assure myself that my suspicions were true. At first, I shunned the belief of my parents, but after living on my own for 2 years, with the aid of a copy of your magazine, which I was given one day, strong hint, atheists don't generally buy our literature, funny about that, I realised that I was the one who was wrong, and I asked for salvation. It concerns a Tyrannosaurus rex specimen that was dug up from the frozen wastes of North America, and it was taken back to the laboratory in Montana, and they cut through the bone
That's right, it was bone. It wasn't completely mineralised. It was still actually bone. They cut through the bone to make a slice, and they put it under the microscope. And while they were looking under the microscope, they were astonished to find red blood cells. And here is an account of that particular event. A thin slice of T-Rex bone glowed amber beneath the lens of my microscope. Blood vessel channels snaked through the bone, and there were tiny chambers there, and a colleague took one look at them and shouted, "You've got red blood cells. You've got red blood cells." Wow. Why are they so excited? Because from a long-age mindset, we shouldn't find dinosaur bones with red blood cells in. Red blood cells couldn't survive more than a theoretical few thousand years at most. How come we've got them in these dinosaur bones? Creatures that supposedly died out millions of years ago. And here are the words of one of those scientists involved in that project, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, and this is recorded in the journal Science, well esteemed throughout the secular community. She said this: "It was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long?" Wrong question. The question to ask is, what's wrong with our theory that says these creatures died out millions of years ago? It couldn't possibly be true. And so this is why we publish these kinds of photographs in Creation magazine. This is a photograph of those actual red blood cells in that Tyrannosaurus rex bone. And so we've had feedback from people who get Creation magazine who said, "Hey, I showed this to my non-believing friends and they were just flummoxed." Now, that's not the same thing as saying they were won to the Lord that day, but these things take time, don't they? Nobody plants a seed and expects to get a harvest that very same day. But if we all do our bit with things like this, what a difference it can make.
You know, there's lots of examples in the plant world of obvious design. And, you know, those things that we see in the plant world have often been copied by inventors. You said, hey, there's a good idea. One of the most famous ones, I'm sure you've heard of this one. This poor person here has got a lot of burrs stuck in their shoes and socks. Now, can anyone... Well done indeed, that's exactly right. Some guy went for a bit of a bushwalk and a whole lot of burrs got stuck in his trousers, and he looked at them and said, hey, look at that, little hooks there, exactly matching the loops in the fabric of my trousers. So he did a bit of experimentation and eventually came up with a fibre, and today we know it as Velcro, and you find it on your sandals, on wetsuit garments, lots of garments have it. But where did the idea come from? The idea came from God. So next time you take, you open the Velcro on your sandals or whatever, I want you to think this, if you wouldn't mind. Wow, Velcro. This was an idea inspired by burrs. Burrs that were God's idea. What a rip-off. Without referring to the literal event of the fall in Genesis, the literal rebellion of Adam, you can't define sin. Put another way, and I can speak from experience here, having grown up in an unchurched household, if you haven't got an understanding that we came from a creator, as Genesis said, but that everything just evolved, then nobody made us, nobody owns us. We can set our own rules. We can determine what is inappropriate behaviour, can't we? But if God made the first man Adam in his image, and we're descended from Adam, then guess what? God made us, he owns us, he sets the rules. He's the one who determines what is sin. And when I was growing up, if I saw a wallet someone had dropped on the ground, it was fair game from my perspective. See, what you believe about origins will determine how you live your life. But now that I'm a believer, what's the first commandment? I'm here to love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind and strength. Of course, what we've heard this week has been helping us to love the Lord with all our mind, so that's going to be helpful. And Jesus said a second commandment is like it, love your neighbour as yourself. So today, if I find someone's wallet on the ground, I behave very differently. You know, if people are serious about trying to get the numbers of prisoners down, maybe the gospel will be a good place to start. It's life-changing.